Today's My Two Cents is something of a viewer request, though, to be frank, there is a very good chance I would have ended up talking about this show at some point anyway. Today we're talking about Trollhunters, as the little thing up here tells you. It's a DreamWorks animation show hosted by Netflix from the mind of Guillermo del Toro, which I did not know going into this. I guess it's based on some books that he wrote with a guy named Daniel Kraus, I think is what it was. Remember, one of the points of the My Two Cents series is that I don't actually do a lot of research into this beforehand, so I could be wrong about that. But yeah, this is based on a series of books that I didn't even know existed, and I guess now I'm going to have to check them out, because I really enjoyed this series. I'm still in the process of really enjoying this series. I sat down to watch the first 2 episodes since they were listed as parts 1 and 2 of the same episode. I was going to do kind of a Raiders of the Story arc type of thing, and kind of form my opinion on the show for this video entirely on the premiere. But I was so enthralled by it that I ended up watching like 3.5 more episodes before I realized I should probably stop and start taking notes. This show is just a lot of fun. That's really the best way to describe it. It's far from a perfect show, but it's a lot of fun. First of all, I think it's worth noting, and it's kind of a sad note, that the main character in this, Jim Lake, is voiced brilliantly by the late Anton Yelchin, which every time I'm reminded of it as I'm watching the show kind of bums me out. Though I do think it's very sweet that they pretty much dedicate the show to his memory. The premise of this show is hard to explain. Even though I did watch more than just those first 2 episodes, I am going to be primarily reviewing them and ignoring the rest of what I've already seen, at least for the time being. The first of the 2 parts starts out with something of a prologue, with 2 of what I presume we are supposed to assume are trolls, given the title of the series, fighting against each other in the shadow of a bridge, which is a really cute touch. One of them is wearing very heroic-looking silver armor, carrying a glowing sword, and has a glowing medallion on his chest. He is obviously a good guy troll, which already sets this apart from a lot of fiction that features trolls, which I already like. The other one is clearly not a good guy troll. He's very clearly trying to kick the crap out of this other troll and take the medallion that he's wearing. And unfortunately, he does succeed in at least half of that. He does defeat this heroic troll, but he does so on the heroic troll's terms. Like a lot of trolls in fiction, these trolls, if they're exposed to direct sunlight for more than a second or so, will turn to stone. So the heroic troll allows himself to be turned to stone by jumping off of the bridge into the sunlight. He solidifies and then is destroyed by the fall, but his medallion is now in direct sunlight. His enemy can't get to it. In this universe, this medallion works kind of like a Green Lantern ring. Once its current bearer is dead, it will seek out a new one worthy of its power. And while it doesn't float off in order to do so like a Green Lantern ring might, straining the credibility of this metaphor, our hero, Jim, does find himself drawn to it as he passes by that area the next day. The majority of the rest of the first 2 episodes is us getting to know Jim and experiencing kind of the bare bones of what his life is like and getting a little bit of world building from the human side of things. We learn about Jim, who's an agile, athletic, quick-witted, and very caring individual with a high degree of dexterity with a knife, born of his love of all things culinary. We meet his friend Tobias, who's a heavier kid. He's the quippy sidekick character, but thankfully his entire personality doesn't revolve around his size. We meet Jim's history teacher, whose name escapes me at the moment, who seems like a very good-natured person and seems to like Jim a lot and seems very willing to help him out with his problems. We meet Jim's mom, who works a lot as she is a single parent, hence why Jim has to take care of her a lot, parenting her almost as much as she parents him. We are introduced briefly to Jim's romantic interest, a girl named Claire. And we meet the 2 primary troll characters of the show. A smaller troll, who is by far the more intellectual of the pair, calling himself Blinky, and his ample associate, Arg.
3 R's.
Who, despite his size, is a pacifist, except when he's not for comedic value. Aside from the inclusion of the amulet and the troll characters, these 2 episodes primarily feel like slice of life stuff. The magical amulet and the weird troll creatures are just sprinkled in there, and that's probably the best part of the 2 episodes, is the tonal difference between these 2 aspects. These first 2 episodes are really funny. Like, I don't know if they're falling out of your chair laughing kind of funny, but they at least made me laugh out loud a couple of times. They really play with your expectations here. When Blinky and Arg first show up to tell Jim that he is now the Trollhunter, a warrior with a destiny to protect both humanity and trollkind from evil villains, whereas in most media this would be a monumental occasion with like epic music and lighting and camera work. This show plays it more like a slapstick scene. Blinky is just so jovial as he's delivering this exposition, and Jim is just so terrified by the presence of these creatures and put off balance by the fact that he has no idea what's going on, that he barely hears a word that they say. And it can get away with doing this because so many shows and so many movies have a scene like this. The stuff that they're expositing isn't all that unique. Yes, the individual terminology is, but it's every other chosen one backstory when you really boil it back down. The writers know that we as the audience know this, so they know that they can play around with the formula, and it worked really well. The same thing happens later when Jim first transforms into the Trollhunter, donning that gleaming silver armor from earlier. The transformation itself is suitably epic, but then he starts out with the oversized armor that his troll counterpart from the prologue was wearing, which is a funny image. And then, after the armor shrinks down to his size, he gets his giant sword stuck in a rock. It's subtle, but it is very humorous, and I really appreciated it. And then, just as these first 2 episodes are really getting going, so much so that in my mind I'm giving them a really high score. The same evil troll from the prologue shows up and attacks Jim. He tries to fight back, but even though he has some skill with the blade, and his sword and armor are doing kind of some of the work for him, at least it looks like they are, he doesn't have any training yet, so he's no match for this guy, and he's running away with Toby and his new troll friends. They seemingly have somewhere that they can take him where he'll be safe, at least for now. And I'm like, oh, cool, they're taking him back to their world. They had mentioned that they have an underground world. I'm like, yes, great. Let's get a little bit of lore about the trolls themselves and their world to close out this episode. And then the episode pretty much just cuts off. We don't even get to see the troll world until like the first 5 minutes of the next episode. Like, seriously, if they had just shown those 5 minutes at the end of episode 2, it would have been so much better, because we'd have gotten an idea of what Jim's life is above the surface. We would have gotten a little bit of him being the troll hunter in the human world, and an idea of what the troll world is like at the same time. It would have rounded out to be pretty much a perfect premiere episode. Which brings me to one of my main problems with the show, at least so far, is it seems to be having issues with pacing. Obviously, this was written to be a serialized show. They knew that these episodes were all going to go up at the same time. They were going to be back-to-back, bingeable, but that's the same problem that I have with RWBY. I mentioned this in my recent RWBY review that went up earlier this week. Just because the episodes of RWBY are meant to be viewed again later all at once doesn't mean that they shouldn't be treated like individual episodes. A show like this gets a little bit more of a pass from me because each season is viewable in its entirety all at the same time. But still, as an episode comes to an end, I expect it to feel like an end, and there have been a couple episodes so far that really haven't. But then you'll go and watch the beginning of the next episode and you'll feel like that probably should have been the end of the previous one. There's also the issue, if you could even call it that, it's more of a nitpick, that Toby, who is, physically speaking, let's be honest here, is pretty much a useless character, is a major part of this team now. He accompanies them on all of their adventures. He's there with Jim when he's training in the troll world. He's just a part of this team, despite the fact that he has no powers or abilities. Whereas Claire, who's obviously being set up to be a main character, is still blissfully unaware that this other world and its conflicts even exist. Like, clearly, they're setting her up to be a third human main character. All of the art for the series has her standing next to Jim and Toby. I just want them to get there. It feels like they're dragging their feet, and I really like her character. I want to see her get more involved. Animation is great. Did I talk about the animation yet? I don't even remember. The animation is great. It's DreamWorks animation, so of course it's great. Like, the Trollhunter armor is beautiful, and especially in the first 2 episodes, the facial expressions on the characters are excellent. Excellent. The cast of human characters is diverse looking, varied, and interesting, and the trolls are even more so. It's so cool seeing so much diversity in this one fantasy race. And while we haven't seen a whole lot of the troll world yet, we've seen enough of it that it feels like a living and vibrant place. What lore we've gotten is interesting and makes sense. And this is probably the greatest compliment that I can give to any show ever, I get almost a Buffy vibe from this. Like, it's obviously not as mature a show as Buffy, is not aiming to tackle the same kind of themes that Buffy did, but I kind of get a similar sense from it. You have this chosen one character with their normie friends who refuse to let them go into battle alone despite the fact that they can't really do anything to help. And you've got a mentor character in Blinky. At the end of the day, I guess the best compliment that I can give to this show is that it presents a universe in which fantasy / fairy tale trolls exist, and they have their own world that exists underground below ours. And they play it entirely straight with, like, silly troll names and everything. And yet, I feel like I can take this completely seriously. It doesn't feel goofy to me. Like, that's a lie. It does a little bit, but there are clearly moments where it's supposed to and then moments where it's not, and they all land. Like I said at the top of the review, it's not a perfect show, but it's definitely a very good one, and I'm looking forward to watching the rest. And also checking out those books, most likely. But guys, that has been my 2 cents on this topic. As per usual, I'd like to know if you have seen Trollhunters, what do you think of it? Though keep in mind, I have only seen like the first 5.5 episodes, so please try to keep your comments as spoiler-free as possible. Either way though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.